So have you ever felt betrayed by a friend, family member, partner, whoever? I definitely have, and it was an extremely painful experience. I felt betrayed, blindsided, and very disappointed, and I couldn't trust anyone. It challenged my understanding of friendship and exercising forgiveness. But through prayer, reflection, and the wisdom gained from God's word, I was able to navigate that hurt and eventually grow stronger. And so that's what I'm sharing with you today: how I handled betrayal, the lessons I learned on trust, forgiveness, and setting boundaries, but also practical steps I used and you can use to help you navigate betrayal in your own life if you do ever unfortunately experience it. So how I handled it: the first thing was I made forgiveness a priority. My first step was to forgive, and boy, it wasn't easy. I was extremely challenged by Jesus because he forgave Judas while, or maybe even before, Judas betrayed him. And that was a life or death matter. My situation was nowhere near the severity of that, but I was still so hurt and I struggled so much. But if Jesus was able to forgive Judas, if Jesus has been able to forgive me, I had to ask myself, who am I to withhold forgiveness from someone else? Now, forgiveness doesn't mean that you excuse the wrong that took place, but it does mean that you let go of the bitterness and the grudge that you hold against a person. Forgiveness is not just a declaration, it's a state of the heart. And it took me a year to truly forgive. At first, every time I remember the situation or heard the names that were involved, there was always something in my heart. And so I knew that I hadn't completely forgiven and my heart wasn't completely pure. So I had to constantly ask God for help to forgive and to let go. My prayers included me being honest about the fact that I was struggling to forgive, and I was still hurt. And I thought that what happened was unfair, it was uncalled for, and it was just painful. But I also did acknowledge that the person that hurt me, they are just human beings. And so I didn't want to hold it against them. So I asked God to help them, to guide them, and to grant them understanding and wisdom where there was a lack of it. Prayers like that helps me so much because I couldn't truly pray for someone and mean it if I was holding something against them. Forgiveness was my priority, not because I wanted to restore the friendship, but because I wanted to have a clean heart before God. Psalm 24, 3-4 says, "Who will ascend the hill of the Lord? Who will stand in his holy place? He that has clean hands and a pure heart." That was my drive. For me to stand before God, I had to have clean hands and a pure heart. Now, different relationships require different approaches. When experiencing betrayal, an important thing to do is identify the type of relationship involved. Is it a close friendship, a romantic relationship, a family member, or even a colleague? The nature of the friendship will determine the approach you take moving forward. The next important thing is to identify your goal. Are you seeking resolution, a genuine reconciliation, or do you just want closure for yourself? Whilst the most appropriate thing to do in some situations is to confront the issue directly, I do think that other situations can be handled internally and without needing a conversation. In my case, this was someone I value deeply, someone I thought I had a very close relationship with. And so I decided to confront certain actions that took place and how they made me feel. And this leads me on to my next point. The second thing I did was change the dynamic of that friendship. So after a couple conversations, reflection, and much prayer, I decided that the friendship had to change. Once trust is broken, rebuilding it takes time and intentionality, and sometimes it's just not possible. I had to assess the situation honestly and ask myself some hard questions. And that led me to the conclusion that I couldn't trust this person, but it also highlighted a fundamental misalignment in our friendship values. My answer was clear. We didn't agree, we couldn't agree. And in Amos 3:3, it asked if two can walk together unless they agree. And so my answer on how I moved forward in that friendship was based on all of that. Having a different perspective from someone else is completely okay. Your responsibility is to reflect and determine whether their perspective aligns with your values, your identity, and the principles that guide your relationships, your decisions, and your overall life. So my decision to change the dynamic of that relationship wasn't an act out of grudge. Rather, it was an act of wisdom. And sometimes walking away or letting something go is probably the best thing to do to honor yourself and to guard your heart. So although it was painful, that situation pushed me into deeper healing and self-reflection. So if you're dealing with betrayal, here are some practical steps I think will be useful in helping you navigate your situation. Number 1, identify the relationship and your goal. Is this a close relationship worth salvaging, or is it one that you need to let go of? Decide whether your goal is resolution, reconciliation, or closure for yourself. Gaining clarity in these two things will help you take the right approach. Number 2, decide if confrontation is necessary. I don't believe all betrayals require a conversation, but some do, especially if it's a close one or if other things are dependent on that relationship. So ask yourself, will addressing this bring me peace, a solution, or will it stir up more hurt? Number 3, pray and seek God's wisdom. Before taking any action, spend time in prayer. Ask God to reveal to you the best path forward and to guard your heart against bitterness. This is where I received my direction and found peace. Number 4, express your feelings clearly and respectfully. If you do choose to confront the person, explain how their actions made you feel and why. Preferably use I statements so that you don't come across as accusatory, but rather explaining how you felt. For example, I felt hurt because I value loyalty in friendship and I didn't feel protected in this situation. Number 5, evaluate the response and act accordingly. How the other person responds will reveal a lot. If they acknowledge their actions and take accountability, there may be room for reconciliation. However, if there is denial and dismissiveness, it may be time to reevaluate that friendship. And finally, set boundaries or let it go. Based on the response and God's guidance, decide whether that relationship should continue and in what capacity. And so I learned so many things from that situation, but I want to highlight 3 really important lessons. And the first one is, when God speaks, listen and act swiftly. God had actually spoken to me about that particular friendship previously, a few years prior to that situation took place, but I failed to act appropriately. I didn't even know what the appropriate action was because I didn't take the time to ask God for guidance on how to manage it. My focus at the time was not making anyone around me uncomfortable, but delayed obedience does come with consequences. And in this case, it led to a failed friendship and a lot of hurt. I've learned to trust God's guidance. Even if what God shows me about a situation or a person doesn't make sense to me in the physical, I am going to listen, and I advise you to do the same. Acting on something that God shows you doesn't always mean cutting someone off. It could mean creating some space or changing the dynamic of that relationship in that period. But don't wait until you're deeply hurt to take action. My second lesson was to thank God in every situation. Even in betrayal, there are blessings. That experience exposed insecurities I wasn't aware of or had ignored and forced me to confront them. And in turn, I grew in self-worth and trusting God. Focusing on the good in that situation was extremely helpful. And when you intentionally focus on the positives, it prevents bitterness and helps you grow instead of becoming resentful. 1 Thessalonians 5:8 tells us to give thanks in every situation. Now, this doesn't mean that the pain isn't real or the pain will go away immediately, but it does remind us that God can use everything, even betrayal, for our good and His glory. And the final lesson was that forgiveness reflects God's love. Forgiveness isn't easy, but it's essential. Romans 5:8 says that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And so when we forgive, we reflect an aspect of God's love and His grace. And again, it's not about excusing the wrong, rather it's releasing it to God, trusting Him and allowing Him to handle the situation. And so if you do ever experience betrayal, I hope sharing my experience helps you. Pray about it, seek wisdom, and forgive, even if it's hard, because it will be. Remember that betrayal doesn't define you, and focus on the positives in the situation. By doing this, you will continue to grow in and further understand God's love, grace, and mercy. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you've experienced something similar, how did you handle it? Drop your advice down below. Thank you for spending time with me today, and I will see you in my next video. Toodles.